Tourette's podcast is not a medical advice show. It's a show about experiences. In the course of that, we may talk about medications or therapies or stories from the doctor's office, but don't mistake any of that for medical advice or direction. It's not. Get that only from people or places licensed or certified to give it. Not from a massively fun and action-packed podcast about our life experiences. Such as...
And these three guys just started having a full-blown conversation about what drugs they thought I was on. Like, the least you could do is just, like, come ask me if you're that curious, you know. I mean, my word.
This is Tourette's podcast, made possible with support of the Tourette Association of America and part of the Geeks Rising Network. If you're not following Tourette's podcast on Instagram, please do. Obviously, that medium encourages a different kind of interaction, and in the Instagram stories area, I've been posting questions and prompts that a lot of you have responded to, including my self-serving request for you to send me photos of your pets. I'm spending my quarantine with a dog and a cat. Can't imagine things without them. Just curious who and what you've got keeping you company from the non-human kingdom. You guys have some ridiculously adorable animals and animal stories. Please keep them coming. I love it. Follow Tourette's podcast on Instagram and talk with me that way. I also put out a question on there about meditation and whether that's in the cards for you. I mentioned at the start of the season that I didn't think yoga or meditation was ever going to be something my brain would put up with. Just a non-starter for someone who can't sit still, or so I thought. I really surprised myself, or rather a certain yoga instructor really surprised me during an extremely anxious time for me. And I was ticking heavily and in this spider web of anxiety, and this instructor was just able to somehow connect me with something else. Like, I wasn't even ticking. I was swept away, and it felt dreamlike, and it felt different. And on the other side of it, I felt just really peaceful. Like it was something really, really working for me. I felt like I had moved to a different place. So I'm just talking about my experience, and I'm not coming at it from a spiritual angle or anything like that. It was just me on Earth being shown a mental hallway or a new room where my mind could take a break and regroup so I could get back to addressing the important things I needed to do with a collected mind. I wanted to play this recording that was sent in from Chris in the UK that is not only a really nice listen, really peaceful and interesting, but it also just kind of illustrates the feeling inside the brain, potentially, of breaking from chaos and floating in meditation and coming out the other side more collected and ready.
Sup, Ben? Chris here. Your old buddy and pal, Chris. Coming at ya from the bath. Got my ears under the water. Just kicking back, enjoying the sound of my beating heart. Meow. That's my bath, not yours, don't worry. Ah, love it in here, man. Just, the mind can just wander around, with no conscious direction. Speaking of conscious direction, concentrating, focusing the mind in any particular direction. That knackers me out like nobody's business. It's nice and quiet in here. Wow. I think we as a Tourette's community, should do everything we can to speed up reaching the melting of the ice cap. That way. Ka-ching. You'll never be too far away. Yeah. From just being able to lie back in some water and chill. Yeah. Either that, or I'm gonna have to invent me some. Ching, Abe Sapien-esque. Ching. Ear covering thingies. Just filled with water. Ka-ching. Yeah. Patent pending. Yeah, scrub-a-dub-dub.
Thank you, Chris. Also appreciate the feedback on the last episode with Renata, a mother to a young man with TS, and if you're a parent looking for another solid example of how to be there for your child, how to advocate for him or her, and do it without smothering them, that last episode with Renata is one you need to listen to. Same goes for the other episodes we've done with parents who, as far as I'm concerned, are totally doing it right. Denise, Daisy, Sarah, plenty more. I'm really proud of those episodes and definitely glad Renata could advance that cause of being intentional as a parent and championing the freedom to be oneself. Patricia says, quote, "Hello, Tourette's podcast. My son is about to be diagnosed with Tourette's. Listening to Renata from your latest episode put my mind more at ease. My son is a talented, beautiful soul, and I know he will be just fine, but it's wonderful to hear the voices of other parents who know what to do." End quote. A similar message here from Tanya Ann, whose son is going into early doctor's appointments for TS. She says she listened to the very first episode of the podcast. That's season 1, episode 0, where we hear my backstory and we hear from my parents on how they dealt with it. She says, quote, "Thank you for the tiny peace of mind." She goes on to say, "Your podcast gives me hope, and I hope listening to this helps me with what he needs to grow up without embarrassment or shame." End quote. That's so awesome to hear, and I'd love to hear from more of you. It's Pride Month, and Tourette's podcast celebrates that, as does the Tourette Association of America. Follow them on Instagram too. They're posting a lot of great material to represent the diversity of the Tourette community, and that's vital to portray. Here's the caption of a post they put up of someone who has TS. His name is Carter. It says here, quote, "My name is Carter Jackson, and I'm a transgender man with Tourette syndrome. I have been out/identified as trans for 4 wonderful years now. Being a man is newer to me than having tics, but I have learned a tremendous amount from both my trans and TS experiences. The most important thing being compassion. Intersectionality exists, and it is important to bear this in mind because one truly never knows what another person is going through and how their identity is actively affecting their experiences. I will inevitably be met with some hardship, but I ultimately know that I am a beautifully made person, deserving of kindness and compassion, and I will maintain the same standard for others." End quote, from Carter Jackson. And then the Tourette Association goes on to say, "For Pride Month, we are showing our support by sharing stories from the LGBTQ+ community. We applaud your courage to speak up and help reduce the stigma around both Tourette syndrome and the LGBTQ community. To share your story, visit tourette.org/pride." Well, we're going to hear from Carter on this episode, and this conversation is nice. It just felt really good. And to put a timestamp on it, in case this is important to do, this was recorded basically right when the protests were ramping up. So I think this was kind of the end of May. So there might have been some big events and breakthroughs and news stories that hadn't happened yet as of this recording time, this conversation with Carter. So if it sounds like we're oblivious to some current event, we're probably not on that timeline yet. But this conversation, we talk about something we both totally relate to and can volley back and forth fluently and feel that sense of community and what it means to just have an understanding and, you know, where we can submit ourselves to conversations and mutual curiosities and just talk and learn from it. And Carter, who grew up in a really small town, not far from me, really nails here the importance of knowing that there are people out there who get it. We have friends. We have a support system we couldn't imagine living without. And not everybody has that. Pay attention to how he puts things and why he needed his Tourette diagnosis, as opposed to just living with it for whatever it was. And So much of this is about communication and acknowledgement and seeing differences as differences instead of differences as something wrong. Carter is a perfect guest for Tourette's podcast. Here he is.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Carter. I'm 21. I stay in North Carolina in like this small little town outside of Greensboro that no one's ever heard of, probably.
I might have heard of it. I'm a North Carolinian. Well, you don't have to say it if that's too specific, but I'm definitely familiar with a lot of the satellite towns. And speaking of Greensboro, I mean, it's, obviously right now it's a really contentious time. And as we speak, we're just a few days into these demonstrations going on in cities across the U.S. Yeah. Is anything going on in Greensboro? I mean, there's a pretty powerful civil rights history there. And actually, you guys have what's it called? The International Civil Rights Museum that's right downtown. And that's where the Woolworths sit-ins occurred. I mean, that very building, it's really historic. And Greensboro has always had this history and that culture. Is there anything happening right now in marches, protests, anything like that in Greensboro?
I haven't heard of one in Greensboro. I know there's one happening in Winston-Salem, like right now.
Right, yeah, and that's pretty close to where you are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, from where I stay, it's probably about an hour.
Yeah.
So, but Greensboro, I feel like if Winston is doing something, there's probably stuff going on in Greensboro, too.
I would imagine, yeah. Well, are you native to that area?
I am. Well, I was born, I don't know if you heard of it, but I was born in Reidsville.
Yeah, I knew Reidsville. I know the Reidsville mayor, actually.
Oh, nice. Well, that's where I stay now, actually.
Mayor Doniker. That's a really cool downtown. You've got the Lucky Strike factory, if I'm thinking of the right place. Yeah.
There is some cool stuff. There were like pianos out downtown for a while, so it was pretty cool.
Yeah, there's just a really cool feel to it. A lot of downtowns, especially in North Carolina, are kind of going through revitalizations and investments and trying to get more support from mom and pop shops and to kind of like cultivate that vibe. And Reidsville, is doing a really good job of that right now. There's this huge mural downtown that I thought was pretty neat the last time I saw it.
It's really cool. And they've just started doing that stuff that I've noticed within like the last few years. So
yeah,
I'm pretty pleased.
It's like I have a lot of friends in the Greensboro area, and it's I guess kind of like a lot of cities in North Carolina and across the southeastern U.S. really, and that has just grown really rapidly over the past 10 to 20 years, and it doesn't really look like it used to.
Yeah. Well, I was born in Reidsville, but I grew up in this even smaller town, if you can believe it, called Walnut Cove.
I know Walnut Cove by name, but I'm not familiar with it.
That surprises me, honestly, because no one knows what that is. I think the population is like 1,100.
Yeah.
You can count stoplights. Like it's a small place. But that's where I grew up, and I guess that's why I've wanted to try and get involved with like more people that have Tourette's and all that, because there weren't that many people there, but I just never met anyone with it. Like, I think I was like 21 when I finally met someone with it. And
so just recently?
Yeah, just recently, like a few months ago.
Wow.
Actually. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So that's interesting. We've talked in past episodes about access to treatment and things like that, where in a lot of small towns or maybe rural areas, the expertise is maybe kind of distant, or it's in the nearest city. Sometimes, if you're lucky, if you want specialized treatment like CBIT or comprehensive behavioral intervention for tics, that's something people are kind of looking around for, and they're not even, in some cases, finding it in the nearest, big city. And I guess Greensboro would be that for you. There's like a couple 100,000 people there, I guess. Correction, almost 300,000 people in that city. I mean, has this been a recent thing where you've tried to kind of reach out and find people who were more like yourself, or has this kind of been a lifelong thing where you've really wanted to kind of reach out and meet people?
No, honestly, it's kind of been a more recent thing. I guess, well, I'll just like jump into like the tics and stuff, I guess. Like,
Yeah.
I started having tics when I was like 9, and then by the time, or at least that's like the earliest I can remember.
Right.
And then I hit 12, and I was like, ooh, like, I think that's what this is. But like a doctor didn't like look at me and say, yeah, that's Tourette's until I was like 19. And so I'm like really kind of late in the game.
Yeah.
And I guess that's why I'm just now trying to like connect with people and that kind of thing.
That's interesting, because I've heard people talk about late diagnoses and whether that has been a factor in some way in how they've accepted their Tourette's or how they've self-accepted, because, you know, sometimes you may know something is different about yourself, but you may not know the name Tourette syndrome until the diagnosis comes later on in life, but you still lived a life with it, and you still have tics your whole life, and you can remember back to when you're 9 years old and when you're like, when you're 12 and you're like, okay, there's actually something going on here. That's a really sensitive age. And a lot of people kind of go inward about it, and they feel a sense of shame. And I've heard people say, you know, in some cases, like, I'm glad I didn't know that, because I would have totally gone, you know, inside my shell. And I'm not saying that's good or that's right, but that's just what people have said. Do you have any observations about that, about yourself and sort of, I guess, trying to solve the mystery for yourself? Were you shameful about it, or were you open about it, or did you have a choice?
I'll say I feel I was more open about it, like with my friends, than I was like my family, perhaps. I think maybe just because, I mean, when you're in school and stuff, you kind of spend more time with your friends than you do like at home when you're going to school like 8 hours a day, and then you play basketball and you go get food together and stuff like that. So I just felt a little more comfortable with them, I guess. And then, you know, because I was spending so much time with them, I just wanted them to know in case they saw me like tics or something.
Yeah.
But I kind of was a little older when I started actually telling people. I was probably in like middle school, high school, somewhere in that range for sure.
Gotcha. So was it because, you know, sometimes people bottle it up because they're aware of how it's going to be perceived, and they'd rather just not have to go through the rigmarole of explaining it to people to where they're going to understand it, versus putting yourself in a situation where you're going to be labeled and misjudged. You know, did any of that play a factor in how you kind of addressed it with other people, or?
Oh, for sure. Like, I definitely, I just know that, like, I didn't feel like they would judge me per se. I think it was just more like, I was sort of more so judging myself more than anything else. I was like making assumptions and being like, you know, even if I do tell them, they're not going to get it, and they're going to be judgmental and all that kind of stuff. And they kind of were for a minute. Like, I mean, you're in high school and everybody grows up and, you know, things happen or whatever, but, you know, people weren't always that great about it. And I was probably in college when I finally met like some good friends who were like cool about my tics and all that stuff.
Huh. So did you get any habits going of masking them or trying to disguise your tics or kind of keeping them under wraps? I mean, that's sometimes easier said than done, but did you kind of go through anything like that?
Definitely. Like, I still do, honestly. Like, I suppress pretty much all the time. Like, if I'm in front of a person, I'm suppressing at least a little bit. I mean, like I said, I've made good friends now, and I don't really feel the need to suppress around them as much. But, like, so I let, like, my motor ones out, but, like, my vocal ones, I don't really let anyone hear.
Yeah.
And, I don't know. But yeah, I have had to do quite a bit of suppressing.
So you mentioned, sometimes when you're younger, you spend a lot of time with your friends and they kind of learn your code and you can be a little bit more relaxed around them. There still may be, judgmentalism and things like that, but that as opposed to your family situation. Well, first off, Tourette has this aspect of being hereditary in a lot of cases. Have you noticed it elsewhere in your family, or I guess like how did your family regard your Tourette syndrome?
They honestly, I mean, some of my family doesn't even know. Like, it's really like under wraps, kind of a bit. I mean, some of them know for sure because I can't like hide it, but like my immediate family, but like my extended family doesn't really know that much. Like the people you just don't see, know. But so I don't know.
Well, so the diagnosis came later on for you when you were 19. What was your family concerned about it early on, or was it? Sometimes it's just hard to know what to do. If you're a parent and you may know the existence of something or acknowledge it, but maybe don't necessarily always see how impactful it can be to your life. And some people say, well, it's just habits or something you'll grow out of. Were there any conversations like that in your immediate family about sort of whether you needed to do anything about it?
I remember I had one conversation with my mom when I was pretty young, and I just remember telling her, like, can't stop doing this, and these are kind of the things I'm doing. And I'm sure that's, like, really terrifying as a parent because you don't really want anything to be, like, quote-unquote wrong with your kid. Like, you just want them to have
for sure
an easygoing, typical experience. So I'm sure that was scary for her, but so I feel like that's probably why she kind of like denied it a little bit and was like, nah, I think that's just like a nervous thing or blah, blah, blah. And that's why, we never really went about getting a diagnosis because I was just like, okay, cool. Like maybe it just is. But once, I got older and I'm still doing things and like getting new takes and stuff, I was like, I'm an adult now. I'm just going to go and get one on my own,
So was that something you had to kind of work yourself up to do, or was it, but by that time, like you're 19, you're adult age, and, you may have a sense of command over things, but, did you have to pump yourself up to go get a diagnosis? And what did you hope to kind of do from there? Was it going to help you manage things, or like what was going through your mind?
I didn't like tell a doctor about my tics until I was like 19, but I'd been trying to do it for years, honestly, and I just couldn't get myself to do it.
Yeah.
I think I was just really scared to have my feelings validated at the time, as helpful as it would have been to have gotten a diagnosis early. I was just terrified to do it. But, I mean, once I finally was just like, yeah, this is kind of what's going on, and I got that diagnosis, it kind of made me feel a little better in a sense because I can, like, confidently tell people, like, yeah, I just have Tourette's, it is what it is. And especially being in school, I can get, like, the accommodations I need, and that type of thing.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah.
So what are you doing in school, and have you had to flex any of those accommodation requests?
I didn't end up getting to give them because, like, a pandemic happened. But
yeah, great.
I was gonna get the accommodations, like seating priority to where I could sit in the back and like type in my notes and just stuff like that.
Gotcha. So, I like what you said about getting the diagnosis and just kind of feeling, kind of validated from there. That because sometimes I don't want to say it's simple. That's the wrong word, but sometimes it's as simple as that, is just wanting to know that there is something real going on. And, you do have a narrative that you can tell people at that point. And, this is an actual thing. This is something I deal with. This is a full-on category. And my doctor, she's great. Her philosophy is kind of like, you may have this diagnosis or you may have this thing, but what bothers you, or like, what would you like to do about it? Because, I guess in one sense you can have a thing, whether you call it Tourette syndrome or not, whatever's happening with you is happening with you. And if you're not bothered by it, then, like, fine, there's no problem. But in the case of Tourette syndrome itself, I mean, just kind of knowing that it is something on paper that there's been an acknowledgement. I mean, there's something really powerful in that. And I feel like that's kind of unique, as far as disorders and health concerns. I put that in quotes as far as those things go. Were there any things that you wanted to do about it? The accommodations is that's definitely an important piece. Were there any medications or lifestyle changes or anything like that you were trying to get from it as well?
Not really. Not so much for my tics. Like, I take medication for like mental health stuff, like depression, stuff like that. But I did want to. I wanted to try to take meds for my tics one time, because I don't know. I always tell people they're not that bad, but they're like the worst they've ever been for me. And I thought about it, but the doctor was kind of just like, well, there isn't really too much we can do about that. And that was kind of like the end of it. So,
with meds and wanting to get a hold of it and everything, you mentioned depression. That is, as a lot of people say on the podcast, that's depression, anxiety, things like that are usually kind of more serious than the tics in a lot of cases. And, when you're having a bad moment with depression or anxiety or OCD or whatever it is, that may, communicate through your tics, and, you may have, tic attacks or at least just a bad tic day. Is that something you've dealt with for a long time? And are there other things that kind of orbit Tourette syndrome that you deal with, like sleep issues, things like that?
Oh, definitely. Like, I think I was just telling someone the other day, like, I'd rather, some days at least, I think the tics are easier to deal with, and like the comorbidities and all that stuff, because I'm so used to the tics and stuff now. But I mean, it's hard to get used to something so fickle, but at the same time, like, I don't wake up in the morning, I'm like, oh, what was that? Like, I know what's going on. But
yeah,
definitely like the depressive symptoms. And I mean, I'm diagnosed with like bipolar 2 and borderline personality disorder. So I have a lot of struggles with like emotional regulation and kind of like my relationships and just stuff like that, And that stuff is what I really, more so than my tics, need to sort of like get a hold of, or what I spend the most time trying to manage.
So you mentioned things kind of being, as bad or as serious as ever. So is that kind of like a line you're drawing? Is it something you have seen kind of get worse over time? And do you predict that it's going to continue getting worse, or has the diagnosis and kind of having a sense of understanding and a sense of community, is that kind of helping?
It has been helping, actually. Like, I downloaded Discord for like the first time and joined a server, and there's like a bunch of people on there with Tourette's and stuff. And just being able to have these conversations and have people understand and like not really have to explain things that much. I mean, it's been very nice, and the solidarity has made me feel more or less alone in it, I suppose.
Yeah, that's an amazing thing about the internet and its ability to kind of give people access to a community, especially for people who, maybe don't live in a big metropolitan area and a small town of 1,100 people. I mean, there may be another person or two there with TS. Statistically, there may be a few, but it's difficult to that's a project to try to just organically find other people who relate to you that way. And otherwise, you can go to a discussion group on Facebook, or you can go to Discord or Reddit or whatever, and there's already rooms with this name, like Tourette syndrome discussion group or whatever. It's really cool, and it's immediate acceptance, and you see people asking some of the same questions that you've had on your mind, and people sharing answers that are beneficial to you. How have things changed for you since you've tapped into that?
Like I said, I just felt so like supported and just less alone in it, because I really was not having, like, I'm dealing with my tics every day, but never really getting to talk about it or anything like that. Or at least to someone who can be like, oh yeah, like I get what you mean. It happened to me yesterday or something like that, So just the solidarity has just been very, very nice. And I hate that I had to wait, or not had to wait, but, that I was like a whole adult before I started to do it. But, I mean, I'm glad I'm doing it at least now.
I mean, it helps with just kind of feeling, as everybody says, less isolated, when you have something that's not immediately relatable to people, or at least, you might not think. And then you find a whole room of people who are exactly like you. And it's, I don't know, just kind of carrying yourself throughout the day, just kind of knowing that those people exist is really comforting.
Absolutely. And I think, like, it's kind of like off topic, just a tad bit, but I was just thinking, like, I don't know, I live in like a small town. It's like predominantly Black. And I just think it's important to remember that in some communities, some of these things aren't as accessible, like getting a diagnosis, getting health care, meeting people and stuff like that,
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that, because that's something a lot of people can relate to, that, they, one thing is, well, if you can't immediately access a doctor in your area, you can at least get online and maybe do some sort of like telemedicine thing. But that's not even so easy for a lot of rural areas, because, internet connectivity is not as reliable as it should be. There's not much broadband access in a lot of rural areas. And, these things are kind of slowly changing over time, but access is a really crucial thing. And I mean, that's on my mind a lot. And I feel really fortunate, I guess, where I live. I live in not a tiny town, but it's still a small town outside of Raleigh, the capital city of North Carolina.
Oh, okay.
And, from there, it's not too far from Durham, which is the city of medicine. And, there's access here, but there are a lot of people living in areas that just don't have that, and may need it way more than I do.
I mean, there just aren't many resources here,
Yeah. We'll be right back. The Tourette Association of America is the premier nonprofit working to raise awareness, advance research, and provide ongoing support to those with Tourette syndrome or tic disorder. With a network of over 130 chapters, support groups, and centers of excellence, the TAA engages with communities across the nation in an effort to provide tools, webinars, workshops, and support for all seeking assistance. As a primary sponsor of Tourette's podcast, the TAA supports the authentic conversations showcasing the diverse representation of the TS community. To learn more, visit Tourette.org, TOURETTE.org. Have you had any awkward experiences where you've had to explain your tics? I mean, I know you talked about, kind of successfully masking them, but any public situations where you've been misunderstood or judged or anything like that because of how people perceive you?
I definitely have. Well, there have been like situations where I probably should have said something and just failed to,
Mm-hmm.
but plenty of awkward situations. Like, I remember a lot of these actually happened while I stayed on campus.
Yeah.
I'm just now realizing, but once I was like sitting outside and like having a lot of tics and stuff, and these three guys were sitting outside, and all of a sudden I hear one go, "I just wish you could see him. Like, he's freaking out. I think he's on drugs." And these three guys just started having a full-blown conversation about what drugs they thought I was on, like audibly to where I could hear them. And I was like, wow. The least you could do is just like, come ask me if you're that curious, I mean, my word.
That's or at least, like take that conversation home. It's not, yeah, if
that
you're,
would be ideal.
I mean, if they were really concerned for your well-being, maybe they should have, at least said like, "Hey man, you all right?" And,
right.
you could explain something and it wouldn't be a big deal. But if it's,
right.
All of a sudden you're some curiosity and like, what a weirdo, what, let's take bets on what drugs he's on. That's, yeah. And it happens to a lot of people too.
I can laugh about it now, but that was just absurd to me. Like, the gall.
I mean, did you just kind of sit there and wait for it to pass, or did you say anything?
I just sat there. I like finished up what I was doing, and I just hopped up and walked away. And like they were still talking about me as I was walking away. And one guy was like, "Oh no, man! Like, I think something's wrong with him." And I'm like, I don't really want that response either,
Yeah.
But thanks for trying to look out.
Yeah, and the thing that lives inside that is the assumption that because there's something different about you, it means there's something bad or something wrong going on. And
yeah,
it's there may be situations where I've seen somebody and they seem, I'll just say different, or and there may have been times in the past where I, maybe have wondered if this person is on some kind of substance, but especially since talking more to the community and relating to people, and this is how I felt about myself the whole time, where there have been, like weird, awkward things about me, and I wonder what people are thinking, and I psych myself out a lot, and it would be so much easier if we just gave each other that space, or at least that understanding. And if you really truly are concerned, and it's not just, I got to quote Akiva, who was a past guest on the podcast, where he was saying, if you have a legitimate concern about somebody and their well-being, that's fair. If you treat them like human beings and you're respectful. But if it's just like you're wondering why this person is so weird and you have this personal curiosity and isn't this funny, then that's not cool. And and that's the situation where we need to be, just kind of cooler with ourselves and give each other more room, but and not feign concern when you're just really just kind of curious about this peculiarity of, with this person next to you. So yeah, it's just, that's a big thing that's got to change.
Absolutely. And I also have a head tick where I kind of like, how you give like a what's up nod to somebody?
Yeah.
Like people think I'm saying what's up to them all the time. Like I'll be in the car with my friends and people will be like honking the horn and waving, be like, "Who's that?" And I'm like, I don't know.
Does that happen a lot where you're not necessarily even paying attention to the tick you're doing? It may just be a normal part of your day, but then all of a sudden people are like, "Oh, hey, what's up?"
Well, I'm like super hyper aware of my tics.
Yeah.
I don't know if that comes from like just suppressing all the time or what, but any tick I have, I'm typically aware of it not my vocal ones all the time, but
Yeah.
especially the motor ones for sure. So I just be like, oh man, like they definitely saw me, and that's definitely why they just waved.
What have you come up with a clever way of explaining it to people, or you just? I mean, how often do you have to do that, or are you, in a position where you've told employers or anything like that, just to kind of like put it to bed?
I haven't had to explain it so much recently. I know when I was like first starting college, like let me think, like 3 years ago, I was definitely having to like tell people because I got a new roommate. I was making new friends that I was hanging out with every day.
Yeah.
And that's mainly when I was sort of like having those conversations. But I still will if I feel like I'm about to spend an extended amount of time with a person and I feel like, yeah, I'm not going to be able to suppress my tics today or whatever. Like, I'll just go ahead and just give them a little heads up.
Yeah.
And just explain like what a couple of my tics are, what they may see me do or hear me do or whatever, and kind of just let them handle it how they like.
Yeah, that's something my therapist says to me is that, you should be responsible with the information that you share with people around you and respectful, and it's kind of on them to reciprocate. And if, they can't handle it, that's, maybe you can invest a little bit more in education, but there comes a point where it's kind of on them if they're not really getting it, and you don't, you can do what you want from there, in terms of whether you want to continue communicating with this person but you're being good and responsible with the information you're putting out there and putting it out there in the best educational way you can. And, if the challenges still come at you, then, it's okay. That's not really worth it. I'm going to move on.
Totally agree.
What do you want people to know about your TS? I mean, if there's one thing that you think is misunderstood, maybe with your life experience or just kind of how Tourette syndrome is perceived in general, have you thought about that? Like just what you wish people would know?
I think just that it's more of a constant thing than people are aware of.
Yeah.
Like, I think they think just because, or some people at least, they'll think, well, because I don't actively see you having tics, like you're not ticking. But
yeah,
I mean, at the same time, I'm like doing all sorts of things. You just can't really tell or see or hear me or what have you. But it's really, I can't really speak for like everyone with Tourette's, but for me, it really is like a constant thing. I'm having a lot of tics, like every few moments or so,
Yeah. Yeah.
And just that, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just that, I just want to be treated like you, honestly. I mean, support me like in the way that you can, that you're available. But I really just want to be treated like anybody else. That's the main thing for me.
Yeah, and you would think it's not a huge ask, that
right.
Because I mean, if you think about it in a straightforward way, I mean, just kind of being cool with other people is just as simple as being cool with other people. And I think the key to it is not necessarily that you have to immediately understand the whole universe of what that person deals with, but you at least have to, I think everybody in the world needs to do this, to at least acknowledge to yourself that there are things you don't understand, and whatever the situation is under no obligation to make sense to you. But if you can accept that there are things that you don't understand, you don't know everything about, then and we could be cool with these things, then or at least cool with that fact. And if you see somebody who's different than you, like, okay, they're different from you, so what? And it's something that should be appreciated more than worried about or feared. Again, unless you observe something that does look legitimately, imminently concerning. But even then, you can do it in a way that's still respectful to that person.
Appropriately.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only time I'm like not really having tics is like if I'm playing the drums or like doing something like that.
Oh, awesome.
Playing some kind of music or something.
Yeah, that's, I mean, you probably know this. I mean, a love of music or a proclivity for musical talent is something that's, we see a lot with the Tourette community. Just this level of creativity. And there's also something about the focus of an expressive activity like that, like drumming. I mean, I'm sitting right in front of a set of drums. They're right behind me. And, it is fun. It kind of satisfies some of the same things that you get out of ticking, just that release. And, I've mentioned this guy a few times before, Mike Miller, who's a professional drummer who has TS. He was, I think he was on last season of the podcast, but he talked about, just the level of focus that he has. He has full on TS throughout his day, but he gets behind the drums and he's able to kind of focus and channel things, and it's not really bothering him that much.
Oh yeah, for sure. I've heard quite a people on the podcast say that they play like some sort of instrument or do something.
Do you play with other people?
Not typically. I used to play in band. I played snare, and I knew how to play the bass parts, but I was a snare player. And now I kind of just like play my set just when I feel like playing, I guess.
Is there any particular style that you gravitate toward?
Not really. I just drum to like the music that I like. So it's a lot of alternative type stuff, to be quite honest.
Yeah. I think I like playing stuff that's a little bit more, like punk, but at the same time, there's also, there's a vibe to whatever style you're playing. And, excuse me. And, there's a mood and a feeling. And if it's kind of a relaxed day, it's like sunny weather. Like I like playing stuff like the Meters, just kind of like down tempo, kind of easy classic funk and stuff like that. It's just really fun to do. It's a good way to get stress out too.
For sure. Like I'm not a jazz drummer, like for sure. I drum like really hard and like aggressively, but like I don't know like what particular style that would be.
Yeah. I guess you don't really need to categorize it. It's just more about the utility of the fun and utility of doing it. And I get the question too, and it's been kind of halfway answered, but I think there's still more research that needs to go into it. But there's something about procedural memory and being able to kind of adapt quickly. I think, and I'm quoting Dr. Canalia here, and I hope I do this accurately, but that TS is the only diagnosis, I think, that's shown enhanced procedural memory. I think that's something that's unique to TS. And the advantage there is that you can learn something like a musical instrument, pretty quickly. Cool. And I don't know what the creativity science is from there, what the brain chemicals are doing, but it is I think a really interesting topic to look into. And I'm sure there are people from the research community who may be able to weigh in on this and respond. And I hope they do. But I mean, yeah, it is a pretty central thing running through TS. And I've talked to other people too, who like kids who are maybe kind of seemingly on the other side of the brain where they're good at math, and I'm terrible at math, but they're really good at like math and technical things. And then there's the other side of the brain, where it's the sort of more, arts and creativity. And so I've talked to kids who start out, really into math and good at math and, like, oh yeah, I'm not really into music, or I don't play an instrument. Then you hear from them a year later and they're totally into it. They've picked up a guitar or something and it's totally changed, kind of what they do with their day. And it almost feels inevitable. I guess for anybody who is listening who has TS, who hasn't really considered it before, I'm not saying you have to, but it's, I'd be curious to know how you take to picking up a musical instrument or drums or guitar or whatever.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree. Like, and I believe it too because I picked up ukulele. I had no clue how to play a uke, and then just within like a month or two, I would go to chorus when I was in high school, and there was a girl in there that would just teach me like a chord a day, basically. And within like a couple months or so, like I could play at least a few songs, you know.
Yeah.
So I kind of believe that because I used to be like a very school-oriented kid. Like cried if I could not go to school.
Huh.
Like don't know what happened. Like, I just, like you said, things just switched up. I just had other passions after that, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
I was a student, but you know.
It was kind of interesting because in elementary school, I went to a private school, and it was the same group of kids. You know, we didn't change classes or anything like that. We sat in the same room all day, had the same teacher.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there might have been like a different art teacher or Spanish teacher or something, but for the most part, same kids around you, same teacher. And, you know, there's definitely like a drill to it. And I didn't do well in that environment at all. You know, it was too rigid and maybe a bit too organized or too inflexible. And when I went to public school after that, starting in 6th grade, everything changed, and there was more of a chaos to it. Like the changing classes and having a few minutes between to like talk to people in the hallway. And like, there's just something about that worked way better for me. Because I think I could kind of get out some energy and put myself in a new environment. And if I sat in the same room all day, you know, my mind's going to wander and go to other things. And I couldn't stand school. Then all of a sudden I really loved it. I was making good grades and I was into it. I liked my teachers, and just because of that sense of, you know, chaos almost, that, you know, a lot of moving parts, and that just seemed to kind of work with how my brain works.
For sure. If I may ask, like, do you have like ADHD? Like, was that a struggle in school or anything?
Yeah.
Yeah, same. So I definitely feel that.
I would say that's probably most of what my medication was geared toward, was trying to help me focus. And I would say unsuccessfully. I still deal with it today. I mean, it's definitely still a part of my daily, you know, I have to have multiple activities kind of going on in front of me as we speak right now. So I'm doing this interview, but I'm like twiddling objects in my hand. I'm holding a battery, a AAA battery right now. I've been like rolling it through my fingers, you know, for the past 30 minutes. And now I'm looking at this ruler, and I'm about to pick it. I just always have to have like some kind of extra stimulus to kind of keep me at bay. Otherwise my brain's going to keep looking, and I don't know. But yeah, that's definitely what I deal with.
Yeah, I've been doing the same thing the whole time. Like, I came outside for a bit, and I'm like sitting in my car, and there's this one of those little like portable. I'm not good with cars and things, but one of these little portable things where you can like jump off your car.
Yeah.
And I've just been like rocking it with my feet and playing with a pencil and like all sorts of things. So I totally get that.
Yeah. I'm kind of a sucker for textures and, you know, just anything that kind of almost feel like that this is not science, but just as I'm picturing it, it's almost like I'm mapping my brain and different things that it wants. Textures or something that weighs a certain amount, or just like it's almost like I have to kind of go through all these things, or else I don't know. I don't know how to explain it.
That makes so much sense to me. Like, it's like a daily thing too. Like, I want to do like 3 things at a time, and they all kind of sound appealing, but like there's just too much going on at a time.
Yeah.
I totally feel that.
What is there anything I haven't asked about that you think's important, or is something that we got away from that you want to talk more about? Or you know, I want to give you the floor and make sure that we cover everything that you wanted to speak to.
The only thing I'd really say is just, and I learned this from a really good friend of mine, but she taught me, you know, like, it's really important to have support networks and
Yeah.
And to network with people and try to find people that support you and that care and that get it, and I just think it's almost vital sometimes to just have someone in your corner,
Yeah, absolutely.
But I feel like if you haven't already, just try to connect with other people who have Tourette's or tics or whatnot, other people who have other struggles that you can relate to, just because some solidarity will just honestly go a really long way. And I'm very thankful for my wonderful, wonderful friends that support me and always make me feel comfortable in who I am.
Because it gives you a chance to just kind of like be yourself and have a regular conversation without, kind of having to get all this baggage out of the way and explaining, okay, well, if you hear me make this sound, I mean, doing that over and over again, education is important, but it's also important to just kind of have a space where you can relax and relate to people and relate to people on topics that have nothing to do with TS. Just that's not the only thing about your life. And you want to talk about whatever it is, drums, or just being able to do that with someone who kind of already gets where you're coming from. And it's no big deal.
Absolutely.
It just makes every conversation so much easier.
Yeah, man, you just have to network, man. You just have to build a network. It'll just make things, well, this is just my opinion, but I feel like for me it's made things a lot easier, for sure.
Thanks for listening. Thank you so much, Carter, for opening up with us. And I'd love to hear some feedback, some listener feedback from you listening to the podcast. You're here at this point in the episode because you stuck with us. And I'd like to think you took interest in or connection to something along the way. What was it? What'd you like about this episode? What struck a chord with you? Tourettespodcast@gmail.com. I want to plug again, Tourette.org/Pride, celebrating Pride Month inside and outside of the Tourette community. All of us listening here know why acceptance and the airing of personal stories are so important. All of us know how important it is to listen so we can learn more about others and about ourselves and about how we all fit together, to find connections maybe we didn't realize we had. You guys are the best audience in podcast land. Tourette's Podcast is made possible by the support of the Tourette Association of America, online at tourette.org. Also, check out their YouTube channel. Tons of webinars and just all kinds of stuff you can just hit play and put on in the background while you're cleaning or, whatever you do when you're listening to Tourette's Podcast. Listen and learn. There's a lot of stuff that I'm learning from, about sleep, about growing up with TS, what it's like going to college, all kinds of stuff. Tourette.org, and just check them out on YouTube. This podcast is also part of the Geeks Rising Network, geeksrising.com, where you can find entertainment, analysis, enlightenment, and wonderfully accepting people. The perfect network to bring Tourette's Podcast to a broader listening audience. Hello to all the non-Touretters listening, and thank you for being there to listen and advocate. Please tell more people about Tourette's Podcast. Head to the Tourette's Podcast discussion group on Facebook. It's easy to join. Hundreds of active members. Everybody's cool, no drama. It's just a place where people understand. One thing though, we have a lot of people lined up to join who haven't taken the one required step of answering the questions that you're prompted with upon requesting to enter this closed group. It's a closed group so we can all feel comfortable to kind of open up and be ourselves. Sometimes we're asking, kind of private questions. And anyway, answering the questions that you're presented when you request to join the group is a requirement. We have to have a way to filter out any, disingenuous people or bots or trolls and these questions are easy to answer. Make sure you do that or we can't hit that approve button. Thanks to Sophia, our admin, hailing from the UK, for keeping things together there. Could not do this without her. And yes, we're going to hear from her on Tourette's Podcast again soon. I hope you heard that, Sophia. At Tourette's Pod on Twitter, patreon.com/Tourette's Podcast to support the show individually. Thank you so much to the people doing that. No matter how small your monthly donation is, it helps, I promise you. Leaving you with one thing, just fill in the blank here. Tourette's Podcast would be better if... Fill in the blank and send that in to tourettespodcast@gmail.com. Or message me through Instagram or Twitter, however you can find me, or through the contact form at tourettespodcast.com. Talk to you again next week. This is Ben.